Fitzmaurice.
Very good, Les Concord, and I welcome the opportunity of speaking on this bill. First of all, I welcome it. I will be supporting it, but I think we need to go back to the days when the country was in trouble, and as it was pointed out earlier, the Finance Minister of the time went into the Channel and spoke about that the credit unions would require up to 1 billion. And it wasn't him probably that said that, it was someone that was giving him that information. But whoever was given that information, I believe it was reckless, because it put a shiver down the spines of a lot of people around this country that started off and set up the credit union movement, volunteers from town to town. And what we don't realise is the amount of good work that credit unions do throughout this country. In smaller villages and smaller towns, the banks have absconded after they get the money. And when you look at the figure that you spoke about, Minister, I think it was something like 11 million. And the credit unions have basically stood up to the mark and funded themselves. And I think that needs to be recognised when you look at banks that we've put 60 billion into and got them all out of. So it shows the credit unions how they were prudent and how they worked in a good way around the country. But I believe going forward, Minister, that we have to make sure that the credit unions, and I look back at the banks 20 or 25 years ago, when you go into a credit union now, it's not a machine you see, like the banks have. It's a person that will say hello to you, especially for elderly people. They have that touch, and I believe that for those rural areas, as a government, and I've said this time and time again, we need to be giving them the facility to get their money out, because their biggest problem in a lot of areas at the moment, and I know they have 16 or 17 billion, is to get money out, to loan it out. That's a big problem for them at the moment. And we need to make sure that we can facilitate that for them as best as possible, because for farmers and businesses, I see in areas where the different banks left, the businesses have gone in to the credit unions, and they do the change for the pub and the change for the shop, and they do all the different facilities that's required. We need to get credit unions into more and more into that you can use a card or a hole in the wall that they'd be in on that. I know there was a problem, and maybe you could address this, Minister, at the time where the clearing houses was costing the credit unions serious money for clearing funds to go through. And I know that there was a debacle on for a while where I think that the main banks were, of course, blocking that. And we need to make sure that they, in my opinion, they're going to be the bank of rural parts of Ireland, where the bigger banks are gone out of. And we have to have all the different facilities that banks have that can be done in there, because that's what will be the saviour of a lot of parts of this country. I just got, ironically enough, an email this evening, and St. Charlotte's Credit Union has got an award today that they're the All-Ireland, the best credit union in Ireland in business, which is a great achievement to Mick Culkeen and all the staff. St. Charlotte started off, they're in Tuam, but they're in Montpellier, they're in a huge Kilcurtain, huge, they amalgamated with a large number. And they are, they are actually, doing loans now, I think up to 150 grand for a certain amount of them. But the problem is, and I see this in some credit unions, they could have 15 million in a bank account, and to get it out there is the problem, because you can only do so many of the bigger loans as ratio to the smaller loans. And I think we need, and the central bank needs to give them that facility to be able to work around it. I know my local credit union in Glenamaddy, John Murphy is there, and the amount of work or the amount of help they give to people, and they are, be it some disaster fund or whatever, the credit union is always the first to sponsor something, because they're from the community. It's people in the community that's involved in it. Yes, credit unions have to look, you can hold your local identity, but they need to bring numbers together to be able to borrow on bigger numbers or to be able to lend in bigger volumes. But I do think that we have to give them the facility to try and match the banks, because there's a deficit at the moment in areas where the banks have left. And also, I was with the heads of the different credit unions where they wanted to help in the housing, the whole housing issue, as Deputy O'Quillan's said earlier on. And they have a large amount of money there that they were willing to loan out on a long-term basis to help in the housing crisis. But unfortunately, and it's my understanding, they have never been taken up on that. And these are the things that, if you keep money circulating, because always remember that the credit union money is local people's money within it, and they will all, they can also do schemes more long-term of putting in your money long-term if you can get it out there to the likes of a state body that wants to build a lot of houses, because I believe it's a way forward for them to flourish, but also good for the housing situation. And I think we should incorporate them more in things like that, because they are willing, the credit union movement are willing to cooperate in all of this. The other thing, Minister, I think that needs to be acknowledged, that the credit unions sort of got themselves out of their own difficulty. There was a lot of fear when that figure came out, and I think whoever gave the figure to the Minister, it was pretty, in my opinion, pretty reckless, because they were sort of going into the unknown and putting a figure out there. And I would ask you, Minister, and I'm going to finish this, I'm not going to hold you here all evening, I would ask you that we need to put in, whether it's through legislation here or working with the central bank, we need to make sure. I see farmers now are getting loans from the credit unions. One time ago, they weren't, the amount of loan they were given wasn't big enough. There is facilities coming bit by bit, but they're ferociously slow. And if it's one thing that this government could do for rural Ireland, is give the credit unions the facility. I'm not saying that they have to loan out every penny in the world. What I am saying is that they can compete with the banks, because we need them where the others are gone. And they're in the small towns. There is also facilities, in my opinion, that they can do other things, because what they have is like sub-offices in small villages that will open on a Sunday or open on a Saturday, which is ferociously helpful to people in local areas. And there are other things that they may be able to incorporate with their money side of it in giving services to rural Ireland. So I want to just say that I support your bill, and I will be voting with it.